her, hers pronouns. And yeah, so kind of like Naomi said, we had a bunch of different organizations on campus and clubs, including frats and sororities, kind of like last year, participate in challenges. But this year they were all virtual. So whether it was posting a picture or um, like resharing SGA's information about consent and reclaim the red, they all participated. So thank you to all the clubs that did participate. But we did have one winner, and a little drum roll, everybody. Yeah. So the winner for this year was Girl Up UMD. So thank you so much for everybody that participated, and especially for Girl Up, everything that you did. You guys won by a huge margin. So yeah, awesome. Now,
Thank
Sasha.
Thank you, Josie. Yeah, Sasha, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sasha. I'm a Sagittarius. Just kidding. That's not important. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also on UMD's Sexual Misconduct Prevention Committee. And I'm just going to introduce our amazing speaker, Alisa Zipursky. So Alisa is our main speaker. We've been working, kind of working with her. We've been getting ready for her to come to this event for the past couple of months. And she's going to discuss the foundation that she created called Healing Honestly, my bad, sorry. And it's about like healthy coping mechanisms and ways to literally heal from sexual abuse and sexual trauma related instances. So take it away, Alisa. Dun, dun, dun.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alisa Zipursky. I use she, her pronouns, and I am not too far from campus. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm originally from Bethesda, so very close by. Before we get sort of into things tonight, I just want to re-emphasize, feel free to change your name on your Zoom account for the call. Feel free to turn your video off, whatever makes you feel most comfortable in the space. As comfortable as anyone can be on Zoom after I know you all spend all of your time on it all the time now. And also just to like make yourself as comfortable as you can be in your space right now, whether it's like having a snack with you or lying down or whatever it is that feels good to you right now. Feel free at any time to directly chat me a question. And then when I get to questions, I'll answer your question and I won't repeat your username. So I'll just repeat it as an anonymous question. So feel free to like pop in a question whenever one arises for you. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing tonight. First of all, I want to thank the student government for bringing me in and getting to be with you all tonight, which has been so lovely and a pleasure to work with. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the work that I do. And then the bulk of our time together is really going to be spent on what I describe as sort of debunking untrue stories about our trauma and the way we heal. There's sort of 4 key stories that we're going to be talking about tonight. The first is that there's some real survivor out there, and for XYZ reason, we are not it. The second, and I feel like this has always been a part of my talks on college campuses, but like feels so pertinent in the year 2020. The myth that college is supposed to be the best time of your life. The third untrue story we're going to focus on is that we can't have meaningful relationships while we're healing. And then the last untrue story we're going to really be getting into is that there is some right way to heal. So to tell you all a little bit more about what I do and who I am and all of that good stuff, I'm the founder of healinghonestly.com. It's a place that I created 4 years ago as a place online to be able to talk about what it meant to be a young person healing from childhood sexual abuse. I myself am a childhood sexual abuse survivor. And I launched Healing Honestly when I was 27, and I was just like, really desiring a place on the internet to be able to talk openly about what it meant to be like a young person trying to have sex and like hold down a job and like have friends and also heal from a trauma that happened a while ago and was still really impacting my everyday life. And I just felt like maybe there's a way we can talk about what we've been through in a way that makes us feel validated and affirmed. And it's not like so damn scary all the time. So I always say, like, healing honestly and our time together tonight will be funnier than you would have thought it would be. Because we're full dynamic people and we feel all of our feelings, the heavy ones, the light ones, and everything in between. So my work sort of traditionally focuses on childhood sexual abuse with a particular emphasis on adult survivors who are really coming to terms in their 20s of sort of what's been going on, in their childhood. But I travel around the country, and now virtually travel around the country supporting survivors on campuses as well. And do a bunch of writing and a bunch of coaching survivors and lots of fun things like that. There are a couple of sort of special things I want to talk about before we get into our 4 stories. The first being what we talked about, like getting comfortable, do whatever feels comfortable to you. Like, this is your time. If that means that like you need to step away for a couple minutes, step away for a couple minutes. Like, I just want you to feel fully empowered to be able to do whatever feels most right to you in that moment, and just sort of lean into that. And I also want to honor that this is like an impossibly difficult time for everyone. And if I hear the word unprecedented one more time in the year of 2020, like it will be like I will burst into flames. And so I'm not calling it unprecedented. I'm calling it really fucking hard. And it can be really easy to feel, especially for those of us living with trauma, that like right now we're like backsliding, like as though we're, maybe we had been feeling better and now we're feeling worse. And like, this time is not what I would describe as backsliding. I would say it feels really hard because it is really hard and it's exceptionally hard. My web traffic, when I compared like February, the month before like COVID really hit, to, I think I compared it to like September, my web traffic had increased by 252%. And it is because there are so many people struggling right now. And it may be like you were feeling better and then it feels like all of a sudden things are so much harder. And it's not a coincidence. Like, so often sexual trauma is talked about like in isolation, like it's this one thing that happened this one time. But like, that's actually not how trauma works in our bodies. And when we feel unsafe and triggered, we go back to all the other times we felt unsafe and triggered. So like now is a time where loads of people feel really unsafe, right? And they might feel like they're being gaslit. They might feel like their reality is being denied. They might feel like people in positions of power don't care about how much hurt and harm they're going through. That is so triggering back to times where we have felt that way before in our lives. So I just want us to be able to like honor how we're feeling right now, and also honor that like this is an exceptionally painful time for so many of us living with trauma. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It feels hard because it is hard. And so my goal for us tonight is just to like hold space for however you're feeling. I want to be able to support you in being able to recognize that the shame and the guilt that you may feel are not yours to carry. Even if the shame, those voices of shame in your head, they sound like your voice, they're not actually you, and they're not actually yours to carry. And to remind you that just because you might feel guilty doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, doesn't mean you actually have anything to feel guilty about. And to encourage you to like honor that body wisdom of like whatever your body is telling you to feel. So the first untrue story we're going to dive into is this false story that there's some real survivor out there, and for X, Y, and Z reason, we're not it. And now I'm going to share a couple images with you all. Hold on. So there are so many different ways our survivorship can be invalidated, and these are just a few of them. So one way our survivorship is often invalidated is because, and we don't feel like we're the real survivor that we have in our minds, is because we might not remember clearly what happened to us. Now, this is an incredibly normal and common response to a traumatic experience in terms of the way the neuroscience in our brain works, but it can leave us feeling so invalidated. I do not have clear memories of what happened to me as a child. What I have is what I describe as like body memories. My body remembers what happened to me, even though my mind doesn't. And it's incredibly common with childhood sexual abuse survivors for that to be the case for a whole host of different reasons. But whether it happened to us when we were kids or when it happened to us when we were adults, it is normal for us to not remember clearly what happened to us, or to not have what I would describe as a narrative memory, where we are able to say a start and the middle and the end of what happened to us the way we would be able to about something positive that happened to our lives. And that's totally normal, but it can leave so many of us feeling like, well, I'm not a real survivor because I don't remember clearly what happened to me, right? Another way our survivorship is invalidated is feeling like this, like, I hear this all the time, is like, it could have been worse. And this is like a way that we minimize what we've been through. And like this story, like all these untrue stories, like are not our faults for thinking like this. Like we didn't make up this thinking. It's not like I invented feeling invalidated about not being able to remember what happened to me, or I invented comparing myself to somebody else's trauma. Like these are messages we receive in a million different ways. We hear it from the people who we love and we trust. We see it in movies. We see it upheld by the institutions of power in our lives. Like, it is not your fault that you hear these invalidating stories. Like, even if it sounds like your voice, it's not actually you saying this, right? So it could have been worse. I call this the myth of the hierarchy of shittiness. That like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but like, I cannot honor and validate my pain because I can see an opportunity for how it could have been even more painful and even more worse, right? And I know like more survivors I know than don't have had this experience of doing that. We may feel invalidated because we may feel that what happened to us was our fault and have misplaced self-blame. And so we might look at our stories or what happened to us and be like, well, fuck, I should have like prevented it because of X, Y, and Z. And because I see a way where somehow I could have prevented this thing that happening to me happening, I am not a real survivor. And I feel like that's particularly important in the time of COVID because there's just an added layer of shame for people who've been harmed during COVID. Like they should feel shamed or blamed for having been harmed if they were somewhere during a time that like maybe they like quote unquote shouldn't have been there because of COVID restrictions. And so it just adds another layer of like self-blame and shame. But like that is not your blame to hold, right? There's nothing that you can do or could have done that would have made it okay for somebody to harm you, period. And another way that our survivorship is invalidated is that we don't know what to call what we've been through. And I find this is more often than not. Like we have these terms like victim, survivor, rape, sexual assault, childhood sexual abuse, these words, and some of them have like legal definitions and some of them don't. And like, while it can be helpful to have language to be able to communicate with each other about what we've been through, these words can also feel like really loaded and really limiting. And so it might be that like what we've been through, like none of these words feel like they fit us correctly, and therefore our pain is like invalidated. And so I just want to say, if anybody is experiencing that, it's totally normal to like not have the words to really feel like you're able to say clearly, you know, like X, Y, and Z happened. Like I didn't call what I went through childhood sexual abuse till I was 27. And I think that's totally normal because it's normal to feel like I don't know really what happened. It was really confusing. There were conflicting things going on. There were confusing messages happening. And that's totally normal. And so if you're somebody that feels like you're struggling because none of the words feel right to you, it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just because the words are failing you. It's because we have a limited language and it's not sufficient, but that's not your fault. Another way we can feel invalidated, the next three are like really interconnected for me, is like we have complicated feelings about the person who harmed us. We don't have quote unquote evidence, and we chose not to report what we had been through. These things really feel interconnected to me because it really touches upon the fact that the way we think about sexual violence is like, it's really, and we as like the collective society, not like you and me, but like everyone, is that we like only talk about it in like this sort of like criminal justice-y way, where like somebody's either a victim or a perpetrator, and we're worried about like evidence and all this stuff. And it's like very much like framed within like a criminal justice way of thinking about harm. But like the reality is that, I mean, that system fails so many of us for so many reasons, including that it's based on white supremacy and patriarchal violence, and it actually perpetuates sexual violence. It does not prevent sexual violence. And also it like is really harmful to survivors and was kind of designed that way to be really harmful to survivors. Like all of that is true. So that's like one part of it. The other part is like, it's designed for us to not see the humanity in the people who harmed us. And if we see the humanity in the people who harmed us, then it means like, well, maybe we're not real survivors. Like just because like I used to feel like maybe I wasn't a survivor because I didn't want to see the person who harmed me go to jail. But now I understand that like it's okay to not like to see the humanity of the person who hurt me, and it doesn't invalidate that they should be held accountable for what they did to me. And it also doesn't invalidate like the harm that they caused me. And it's okay that I don't want them to go to prison, to a system where like sexual violence is just perpetrated again and again and again. So it's like all these things, like they're all really interconnected. Like it's okay to feel complicated feelings about the person who hurt you, whether they're feelings of affection and love, or there are other complicated feelings. Like it's okay to feel like, oh my God, my story would never hold up in like a criminal justice context. It's like why over 95% of survivors have nothing to do with the criminal justice system. And so like all of that is totally normal, and it doesn't make you any less validated and affirmed in what you've been through. And then the last is like for survivors who aren't white cis hetero women harmed by a cis man. I am a white cis hetero woman who was harmed by a cis man. So my story of survivorship follows like sort of the one formula that like we really see in pop culture, that like we as a society are sort of comfortable with understanding, this idea that like cis men harm cis girls. And for over tons and tons of survivors, their stories don't fit that formula, and they are left sort of being like ignored and even like erased, even in survivor advocacy spaces where like you can go on Instagram and like check out, you know, like survivor advocacy like hashtags and stuff, and it's all like men do this to women and girls. And it's like, oh, that is really not seeing the whole picture of what happens, right? I have a friend who grew up, was assigned female at birth, and so was socialized as a girl, as a child. And their mother would say to them like, oh, you know, like be careful of men, and men are, even men in your family can be really creepy, you know, and like always warning them of the dangers of men. And they were harmed by a female family member and by a woman who was in their family, and felt really erased and invalidated and felt like something was wrong with them because like their harm didn't follow this formula. And not only does it like erase sort of who is capable of harming someone, right? Like people of all genders and sexual orientations are capable of harm. but it also, the transphobia and the homophobia that can happen within this context can further silence survivors. So queer and trans survivors have to go through this whole other layer of oppression where they're being pathologized, and people want to quote unquote find a reason for their queerness and transness, as though queerness and transness is not natural, and say like, oh, your sexual orientation, your gender expression, your gender identity is because of what happened to you. Not that this happened to them and also they may be a queer person and also they may be trans. That this invalidation and erasure of identity because of the impact of homophobia and transphobia. And this is rampant. And that can also be enormously invalidating for survivors. And so it's really, it is something I feel really, it's important to take a minute to talk about, because that shit runs so fucking deep. And there are so many survivors who feel like survivor advocacy spaces, and not even feel, like have been told survivor advocacy spaces are not for them because of either who harmed them or because of their sexual orientation or because of their gender identity. And that is all bullshit. And that is the failure of those organizations, not a failure of you. And so I really just want to make that really abundantly clear. And so if any of these untrue stories resonate with you, if there are other untrue stories that are coming up for you as we're talking about this, that is totally normal. You're in really amazing company. I feel like the one like really unifying experience of talking in being community with thousands and thousands of survivors is like everyone I know has their version of one of these stories that invalidates them and makes them maybe sometimes feel like there's some perfect survivor out there and they're not it. So I feel like by feeling that way, it's actually like an extremely unifying experience in its own sort of strange way. And to like illustrate that a little bit for you, I created this survey almost a year ago, and I was just like kind of curious, like, okay, so there are all these untrue stories that dominate our lives. Like, what are the ones that lots of people hear all the time? So I just made this like anonymous survey and had survivors fill it out, people who identified as survivors. And I was just like check box if this is like an untrue story you hear in your head, you know, like on the regular. And I wanted to show you all this time later, 940 people replied, 940 survivors. I just want to show you all some of the results. And my intention in doing this is to just show like just how normal these, like the presence of these voices are. And that again, it's like, they're there, not even if it sounds like your voice, it's not there because you've done anything wrong. Like we live in a world steeped with rape culture that makes survivors feel this way. So it wasn't that bad and it could have been worse. Like, again, the myth of the hierarchy of shittiness, right? 68% of respondents clicked that was a voice that they had in their head. I can't be a real survivor if I don't remember clearly what happened to me. 83%. Maybe I'm just crazy. Classic. 75%. They'll never believe me, so I can't believe myself. 49%. I didn't report it or tell anyone, so I can't claim to be a survivor. 47%. I don't have any evidence of it, so no one will think I'm a survivor. 72%. So I just share that again to show, like, if these voices are coming up for you, if you're the friend of somebody who has been through sexual violence and you hear them echoing some of these voices, it is so important to know, like, you are not alone, and those voices are there. They're not actually yours. They're not actually yours. They are a result of a world where we have conditioned everyone to believe that there's some real survivor out there and everyone else's story just somehow doesn't cut it. And it's a way that we, you know, collectively invalidate and erase the violence against people, the sexual violence that people endure. So we're going to move on to our next story. And our next story, I feel like before COVID, I might have had to persuade some of you of this. And now, however many months in, I feel like everybody is on the same page. And the false story is college should be the best time of your lives. Because you all have had to deal with some real shit this year. So let's be clear about that. And so I'm gonna pull up again another screen. 1 second. Okay, so right now you should get to see some truly glorious photos. These are me in college. I graduated in 2010, so I'll do the math for you. I am 32 years old. I went to the University of Michigan. I was the director of our dance marathon for 2 years. That's on the left. In the middle is me wasted dancing with a friend. And on the right is me breaking into our stadium called the Big House in the middle of the night with some friends. And that's us on the 50-yard line. Not pictured. Halfway through college, truly halfway, in the middle of the summer between my sophomore and junior year, my chosen father died. With his death brought the resurfacing of my childhood trauma that had been previously dormant. I had been like okay until I wasn't okay. And I was diagnosed with PTSD for the first time. And I show this to you all because all of these things can be true at once. Like, yes, I did have fun and I did do those things. And I also was hella traumatized and I cried a whole bunch. And there were days where I couldn't leave the house. And there were days where it was too painful to engage in the world. And then there were days where I stayed up all night with my friends and fell asleep like wasted spooning a burrito, you know, and woke up with like the black beans on the pillow beside me. And like all those things can be true at once. And I just think that for people dealing with trauma, there is so much pressure during college to like live it up and be carefree. But the real talk of it is that like when you're dealing with trauma, you already feel a gazillion years old. And like my therapist once asked me how old I felt, and I told her 65, and she said, that sounds right. And it's just like, because you're dealing with heavy shit. And other people may or may not be dealing with the same heavy shit. And I feel like living in a global pandemic, you all are experiencing that times 1,000 because some people's families are also impacted and people individually are impacted differently at this time. So maybe some people are able to like, quote unquote, enjoy themselves a little bit more than other people. And other people are like hella traumatized right now and in a lot of pain. And I just want you to know, shit gets so much better after college. Like, this isn't like you have 4 years to get in touch with like feeling young and carefree and then that's it. And then you're like slapped with the real world. Like you all are already in the real world. If you're dealing with trauma and you're living through this pandemic, nothing's realer than that. And I got through my college years, but I'll tell you, like after college, I went and I lived abroad for a while and I got to do that like adventure and like, you know, just like being present and spontaneous and living somewhere foreign and like doing the damn thing. And a year after that, I got to a point in my healing where I started actually feeling really comfortable in my body sexually. And I started enjoying casual sex for the first time in my life. And I was like going out, meeting people, pulling strange, banging dudes, and having the time of my goddamn life. And that was well after college. Like, and I'm 32 and like the last 9 months have been a stone cold bummer. But if you don't think when shit is safe that I am not wreaking havoc on this goddamn city and partying my ass off, like you are sorely mistaken. Like it is totally bullshit that there's so much pressure on 4 years that like then you don't have fun. You know what's really fun? Like living in your own space and not having a global pandemic to worry about and having the time and the space to explore what feels good in your body and making the rules up as you go. And you get to do that regardless of whether like you graduate next year or whatever. So I just really, really, really want to say, like, there's so much pressure on that, and it's okay. You can just release that, And I feel like nobody's had to do that more than you all, who are in school right now through all this crap. So, so I wanna, oh, great. So I have a couple questions and which I'll get to. And I also want to encourage everyone, again, remember, you can send me questions privately and I'll read them, anonymously when we get to the question time. So if we're talking and things are popping up for you, don't hesitate to ask a question. So we're gonna now get to our third untrue story. So we talked about how the untrue story that there's some real survivor out there and we're not it. Then we talked about how college is supposed to be the best time of our lives, and that's bullshit too. Okay, our third untrue story is that we are incapable of having healthy relationships, whether they be friendship, sexual, romantic, whatever. That like we're broken or we're damaged goods and we can't have those things that we want. I'm going to share another image for you all. Okay, we already saw that one. Cute, cute, cute. Okay, let's get to the next one. Okay. So, proverbial show of hands, who's seen something on the internet that's like, you can't find love until you learn how to love yourself. And I'm asking this proverbial question. Oh, I see some hands. Also to give myself an opportunity to drink some water. Okay. This is like, you're gonna hear a lot in the next two stories about my feelings about like Instagram wisdom and like Instagram wellness, and like there's some good shit out there. There's a lot of hot trash out there too. And I see all over the place this like idea that like we cannot have the healthy relationships until we learn how to have a healthy, loving, love ourselves. And it's like, sure, like loving ourselves is fucking tight and that's great. And like if that's something that's available to us, like go for it. But like it is a lot of things, but at its core, it's also hella ableist because it like completely does not look at the fact that like for some of us, mental illness makes it so that we are not capable of feeling that for ourselves. And it's not because like we're not trying hard enough or we like have low self-esteem. It's like some of us are like neurotransmitters work differently. Our serotonin levels work differently. The science in our brain works differently so that it's really fucking hard to like just be like, oh yeah, I love myself. So now somebody can love me. And like, so I just want to like level with you about that first and foremost. The second is that there like seems to be this like sort of idea that there's like this magical point in our healing where suddenly like we're no longer quote unquote damaged goods and like we're going to be this magical partner to a significant other and the best friend ever and the greatest family member ever and all of this. Like healing is non-linear. And so that means that there are no like points where the past just like melts away from us and all there is goodness. It's hard, but trauma is always a part of our lives. It's sort of embedded in our bones when we experience it. And I don't say that to discourage you. It doesn't have to run our lives, but it also means that we need to not wait around for when we stop, when we never experience another trigger again, or we never feel the impact of our trauma ever again. And then we feel like we can go out in the world and have meaningful relationships. Meaningful relationships in any capacity, whether they're friendship, sexual, romantic, or whatever, actually support us in our healing, right? Like the trauma tries to trick us into thinking we should isolate ourselves. Mental illness tries to trick us into thinking we should isolate ourselves. That like what we need to do is like steal ourselves away, fix ourselves, and then we can be ready for the world. But like, we actually need each other and we need community in order to heal. in order to feel safe. We all need human connection. I feel like if anything, and we've all learned all this year, is like, yo, we all really need human connection, right? And that's really true when you're dealing with trauma. And so I want to like really challenge this idea that like there is such thing as damaged goods. That shit is bullshit. Like, we are human beings, and we also are not going to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to us, of which we had no control over. It doesn't mean it's not going to impact us and hurt us and be a part of us. But also we don't go into this other category where somehow then we don't have gifts to offer the world and offer people around us. And I remember being like, I was 25, I was in like my first apartment, crying on the floor to my best friend after like another dude ghosted me. And I was just like, maybe I just have the daddy issues that everyone talks about, you know, because I was abused by my father. And I was like, I have daddy issues. Like, I'm never going to be able to find someone. And my friend was like very patient with me, but also was like, listen, you are dating 20-something-year-old guys because you're unfortunately heterosexual. And like a lot of them just fucking suck. And it's not because like you're broken or you don't love yourself enough or you need to heal more. Like, sometimes like people are just like people are shit, right? And people ghost each other and whatever. But I remember really clearly like internalizing that sort of message that like I needed to be somewhere I wasn't in order for people to value me and for me to value what I can offer other people. And it's just not true. So what are some things that I have learned that help me be in relation to other people as I'm healing? One is to communicate and to share as much as feels right. So as trauma survivors, our brains are really, really predisposed, and again, nobody's fault, to like black and white thinking. And it comes from like a very survivally place of like having to categorize things as like safe versus unsafe. But it can show up in a lot of other ways in our lives, sort of thinking in these all or nothing, black and white thinking. And I see this really commonly with other survivors when we talk about disclosure and sharing with other people. I think there is this common feeling that either we tell somebody all of the pain that we've experienced in our lives, like in chronological and alphabetical order with like citations and a bibliography, or we just smile and pretend that like everything is fine and that we've never experienced pain and like everything's perfect. And it's like, neither of those things have to be true. Like, you can do either of those things, but there's like a whole world that lives in between those two poles. And I encourage everyone to experiment within those extremes, you know, from those black and white poles to find some gray area. So an example is like, for me, when I was like having casual sex, I was still really nervous that I would be like triggered during sex. And but I like didn't really want to like fully disclose to anyone because we weren't like in a relationship. But I also wanted them to know, like, I felt like maybe if there was a way I could like signal something that it could help reduce the anxiety I was feeling, of like the possibility that I could be triggered. So I experimented a little bit, and I'd like, you know, be making out with somebody and I'd be like, okay, listen, something happened to me a long time ago that still really causes me a lot of pain today. I don't want to get into what it is. I just want you to know sometimes it like shows up when I'm hooking up. And if that happens and I need to like press pause or stop, I just want to know that like you're not going to take it personally, because it's like not about you. And know that like I'm into you, I'm into what's happening. And if I like need to slow down or pause, and maybe I'll offer like a, you know, a word or a safe word or something, like just like, I just want you to like take a beat and know that like it's not because you did anything wrong or there's anything wrong with you. Like, I'm into you, you're into me, like we're good. And then I'll take it one step forward and I'll tell them exactly what I want them to say. And I was like, and I just want you to tell me like, you won't take it personally if we have to like pause or stop. And that's cool with you, that like, you know, I'm down. And I found that like people were really willing, especially to like hear and honor that when we tell them what we want them to say back to us, because they like don't know how to react, and it's okay. We don't live in a trauma informed world. We're not, unfortunately, having like a lot of conversations on a large scale about like how to respond to somebody in a supportive and trauma informed way. So the more we can like offer that language to somebody, I think it can be really helpful. And so I found that like it made having sex with people that I wasn't in like some deep committed relationship with like a lot more manageable for me, because I was no longer like so afraid of, oh my God, if I get triggered and then I have to tell them, and then I have to explain, and then I have to like fix the fact that they think it's about them and like they've done something wrong. It just like ameliorated so much of that anxiety that I was feeling. And it was like, again, trying to find those gray areas. And like some people are shitty and like responded not in a helpful way. And sometimes that's telling, like be like, okay, that's telling. I think there's a real difference between people who don't know how to respond, but there's a willingness for them to learn, and people who respond poorly and make it about themselves. And those are like, I think for me, like something that I was sort of picking up with. And I think also, along those lines of that communication, like disclosure and sort of what we talk about with disclosure means that like nobody is entitled to your story, no matter how close they are to you. I don't care if they're a family member. I don't care if they're a significant other and you've been in a relationship with them for a million years, or they're your best friend or whatever. Our stories are ours, and we have full autonomy over how much we share, when we share it, and what it looks like when we do. And so I just think also that it's helpful to think about disclosure in a really broad way, and to open the options of what disclosure can look like for us. Beyond that sort of, I'm not going to tell you I'm struggling at all, or I feel like I have to tell you everything, and just experimenting a little bit with that. So I told you about how I did that, like sort of sexually. I'm going to tell you about it like in a friendship context too. So I was coaching a survivor who was really struggling because she was having a really hard time building friends, because every time she would sort of get that like momentum and making a new friend and connecting with them, she would get hit with like a really difficult time emotionally. She would like get hit with a trigger, and she would need to like withdraw and pull away in order to take care of herself and manage her own mental health. And by the time that she felt like ready to sort of re-engage in a friendship, she felt like the momentum was gone, like they couldn't get to that place of ease with the friendship. And she was like, I don't want to burden them, and I don't want to ask anything of them. And so I asked her, I said, how would it make you feel? And I'm asking all of you this. How would it make you feel if a friend told you this? They said, something happened that still causes me pain and impacts me today. I don't really want to get into what it is, but it can still really impact the way that I feel. And so sometimes I get hit with it and it's really hard for me. And what I need to do to take care of myself is to fully pull away and withdraw. And I don't answer texts and I don't answer calls, and I sort of have to tag out, and then I can tag back in. I really like you, and I like being your friend, and I trust you. And I just want you to know, like, when I do that, it's not because you've done anything wrong or because I don't want to be your friend or because I don't want to chill. Like, it's because of something that happened to me that has nothing to do with you. And actually, like, would it be cool if maybe like every 2 weeks you texted me and checked in on me? Like, maybe there might be a week where I don't feel like I can reply, but like, even if I don't, can you, like, it means so much to me to hear from you. Can you like still reach out to me? And like, can you keep inviting me to those like Zoom hangouts that you all are having? And like, maybe I won't be able to come to most of them, but like, can you please like keep inviting me? Because like one day I will feel well enough and I want to be there. And I asked her, like, how would it make you feel if a friend said that to you? And she said, it would make me feel important. It would make me feel like that person trusted me and that I mattered to them, and like that they like felt safe telling me that, and like asking that of me means that like they must like me and care. And I was like, yeah. Yeah, dude, like totally, like I think we get so worried about burdening each other with our feelings. But when we pull away and we imagine, like, well, what if a friend told us this, that the thing we want to say to them, how would it make us feel? And we can be that explicit. We can say exactly what we want, whether it's keep sending me those invites, even though I'm going to like miss all of them. Keep sending me those texts, even if I don't reply to them. Whatever the hell it is that feels like what you need. And let me tell you something, when you start doing this, it's like you're modeling it for other people too. And it is so fucking amazing to see like your friends who like maybe we didn't know were struggling with something in their lives suddenly feel like, because we laid out a way of talking about this, they feel like they can start doing that too. And they can respond to you and be like, yeah, sometimes what I need is blah 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 blah. And it's because like you approached the friendship or the relationship by talking about what it is you need, what it is you want, and being really explicit about like, even if it look like I'm signaling to you that I'm out, I'm still here. I just can't engage. It's like really tight when you start building friendships or relationships off of that. And then you get to see that they feel like they can connect in that way too. And the last point of that is like, that also has to do with boundaries, right? And like sometimes we worry about like burdening ourselves onto other people with our pain. And right now, everyone is in so much pain. So it feels really overwhelming. So it's really important that we're able to communicate clearly with each other to be like, like, do you have the bandwidth to be able for me to unload on you or vice versa? Like honoring that everyone has needs, right? Like, and everyone's needs are important and matter. And maybe sometimes we feel like our needs take up all the space, but we create space for everyone's needs. And we try to honor that as best as we can. And it doesn't have to always be heavy, right? It can be as simple as like asking somebody, like, do you have the bandwidth right now to like let me vent at you? And if they say no, be like, okay, and go down and widen your bench so there are other people you can go to or other things that you can do to soothe yourself, because that's really important too. Like I am married and my husband does so much emotional labor, like being present for me and supporting me. And so it's really important when I'm in the worst of it, still to ask him, like, what do you need to do to take care of yourself while you're taking care of me? And for him, it's going to be like, he needs to like snuggle the dog alone without me around, playing video games, like listening to his like emo 90s screamo music, whatever. And like, that's what he needs to be able to then be present for me. And it's like, okay, so he's doing all this labor for me. I can't do the same for him. But what I can do is honor that he's a human being with needs too, and check in and make sure he's like honoring those needs, even though I'm not like doing anything for it. And that's just like something that's really helpful for us, especially when we're struggling, as everyone is right now. But we like still very much need human connection, right? We all do. So I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm going to encourage more questions and take a beat until we get into our fourth and final untrue story. Great water. Is everyone drinking water? Are we all drinking water? Is everyone drinking enough water? Hydration station, am I right? I don't know what hydration station is. It just came in. Okay. Whew. Let's get into it. Fourth untrue story is that there is a right way to heal. Okay. So there, spoiler alert, is no right way to heal. And I know mine blown. And there's like a whole bunch of shit on the internet. This is again where I'm gonna talk shit about so much shit I see on Instagram with people, predominantly white cis hetero women, selling shit that they say is going to help you heal and find some pseudo level of wellness. And the healing world and capitalism have just like fused together, right? To create this idea that like we should be spending money on all this crap that's going to help us heal, whether it's like juices or a specific kind of yoga, or I don't care. Like there's just so much crap out there. And like then there's also crap that's like telling you how important healing is. Like if you don't heal, then blank. If you don't heal, then you can't break the cycles of harm. If you don't heal, then you can't like have a loving relationship, whatever. And it's like, tight. Are you going to tell people then how to heal, or are you just going to tell them how dangerous it is not to heal? And it's like, nah, dude, you're not going to tell them how to heal, because no one can tell anybody what that means, because it necessarily means something different to each of us. And not only does it mean something different to each of us, it can mean different things to us on any given day. Like how I would answer the question of like what healing means to me is completely different today than like it would have been maybe even 6 months ago. It's something that grows and ebbs and flows and evolves like as our lives do. And so I'm going to pull up another image. So this is my healing is necessarily different for all of us image. So sometimes people give advice that isn't realistic to our lives. Like there's a formula, and we already just discussed how there is no formula. And some people will love to give you advice. And if it doesn't feel right to you, you can leave it. Like, let me give you that permission slip if you need that permission slip to write it for yourself. And what I've noticed, especially lately, not that the problem is new, I've just been hearing more and more about it, is like really terrible advice that some therapists have been giving patients. And I like love therapy. I've been really lucky. I've had both the financial means and the accessibility to be able to find like really dope therapists for most of my life. But it's also something where like if a therapist says something to you and it really doesn't feel right to you, you don't have to do it just because your therapist says so. Like listen to your gut. I had a client whose therapist was really like truly forcing her to do group therapy, like a group support system or group support group. And it felt so wrong to them. And they were like, is there just something wrong with me that like I find this experience really triggering and I actually don't feel like it's helpful at all for me? And I was like, no, like some people find support groups really wonderful and transformative and cathartic, and for other people like that is not how we heal, and that's totally okay. So even if the person is like coming from like a place of like authority, like it is really important that if something doesn't feel right to you, just honor that, and it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Okay, we talked about what we need in our healing will change and grow as we change and grow. So a small example of this is like, my trauma lives really in my bones for me. It's like very physical. And I find it's really helpful. Like sometimes physical action is actually more therapeutic for me than even like talking, even though obviously you can tell I love to talk. All I do is talk. I am what I would describe as an extreme extrovert. But even then, I find that like often the sort of somatic or physical part of trauma, like if I can address that, that actually helps me more. So for a lot of years, I was doing like a whole ass ton of yoga. And then some shit shifted in my healing, and I was just angry all of the time. And by the way, anger is tight and great, and never let anybody tell you you're too angry. Okay. Anger is awesome and a very important healing tool in healing. Anger is tight. Okay. Can get in that another time. If you have questions about anger, feel free to drop them in the chat. It's one of my most favorite topics. But I started getting really angry for the first time in my life, and like furious all the time. And it wasn't like a small way, it was like months. And my really cool doctor, I talked to him about it, and he was like, listen, you do have homicidal rage, and you have every reason to feel that rage. We need to find some things that help you manage it so that it doesn't run your life and you run it. And I was like, cool. So I started training to be a boxer, and I trained as a boxer for 4 years. And I learned how to beat the shit out of things, but I learned how to do it in a way that felt safe and had boundaries. Boundaries are cool, remember? Had boundaries and consent and felt right to me, so that I felt more in control of my body. And I was like, I can't believe I ever liked yoga. Like, punching shit is so fucking awesome. And then after 4 years, I was like, man, I don't know. This just like doesn't feel like me anymore. And then I found other things to do with my body that felt more aligned with my healing. So like, that's just a small example of like how what we need can grow and change over time. Also, we all heal differently because we experience our trauma and healing differently, and we experience it in relationship to other systems of oppression. So as a white cis hetero person with access to money as a result of white supremacy, I have had access to a lot of healing resources that are not available to everyone, even though they should be. And I've been able to make decisions in my life, like leaving a toxic work environment, and being able to do that because I had money, that other decisions that other people might not have access to. Also, when I have been healing, I have not experienced the layers of oppression of the trauma of homophobia and transphobia and racism. And those are all traumatic oppressive forces that necessarily impact both trauma and healing. And so it's another reason why it's exceedingly important to understand the sort of individual nature of healing journeys. And truly why nobody can tell you what it is that you need. You need to explore that within yourself. And then lastly, our relationship to forgiveness, to accountability, to the people who've harmed us will be deeply personal to each of us. Forgiveness is like a really great example of something that's really different for everybody in healing. Forgiveness is like a deeply personal thing. For some people, it's embedded in religion for them too. And so it touches upon other aspects of their lives as well. And again, with the Instagram bullshit, there's like this Instagram-y thing of like, oh, you have to learn how to release your anger and forgive in order to heal. Like, bullshit. Like, everybody gets to decide what forgiveness means to them and their relationship to it and whether it has any place in their lives. And that is so different from person to person. Forgiveness has nothing to do with my healing journey. And that is so specific to me. And somebody who's been through the exact same thing as me might have a completely different relationship to forgiveness. And same with accountability in terms of what we want for healing. Like, you know, the fact that like there are a lot of people out there putting pressures on survivors to share their stories, but like that is really specific to each person, or telling them that they have to go report it. But like for another person, they may not want to engage in the criminal justice system for the reasons that we talked about, because it can harm them and it continues cycles of sexual harm too. You know, like that is so specific to each of us. Whether you continue to have a relationship with the person who harmed you, a lot of people love to have a lot of opinions about that. You know, like, oh, you can't speak to that person or you can't see them or whatever. And like these rules. But like that is so individual to each person. So I am going to talk about some things that I have found to be, generally speaking, true, regardless of the person. So these are some of the sort of the broader things that I have learned. One is what we talked about. Healing is non-linear. We can often feel like we're backsliding, but that is actually not true. So when we talk about something being non-linear, like, yes, you can have good days and bad days. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But like, you can have rough like months. You can have rough years. Like, I was really great from like 23 to 27. 27 was hella gnarly and like really rough stuff. It got better for a few years. 31 was tough. Like 32 a little easier. You know, like it ebbs and it flows. And so it's not just that like maybe a day is difficult. Like we can go through whole lives and then experience something that's seemingly unrelated that can then impact our relationship to our trauma and bring it up in a new way. And it doesn't mean like you're wrong or you're crazy. It's just how trauma works in our brains and our bodies. The second is learning about our triggers and creating awareness about how our minds and bodies and spirits are interconnected can be helpful in managing our trauma. So like just being able to take some time to observe without judgment about what may be can make us feel triggered, can make us feel anxious, can make us feel that sort of feeling in our body where we don't feel safe and don't feel in control. And doing that without judgment. So for example, whether there's a song that you hear or a scent that you smell or a food that you taste, and instead of being like, wait, like, why is this bothering me so much? Like, I'm safe, I'm fine. Instead of judging it that, just observing and being like, oh, okay, this is something that I'm seeing happening in my body. And it's a part of old survival mechanisms. And it's a part of, something that goes deep into my body and my sense of safety. And I'm going to pay attention to that. And maybe also, like, instead of like trying to rationalize it and be like, oh, I'm safe, I'm fine, like, be like, okay, well, maybe we're not going to eat that food right now. Or maybe we're going to turn that song off. Or maybe we're going to ask somebody to turn the song off because they're playing it. And we're going to do that. We're going to ask them to turn the song off. We're going to move ourselves into a different space and find ways to soothe ourselves. Like following sort of the line of being like, okay, something is happening in me that's saying I'm not safe. So I'm going to take some actions to soothe myself or to make things a little bit better for myself, using self-kindness for that. The third is community as a source of resiliency and healing. And that doesn't mean that you have to be surrounded by survivors. Although what I have learned as being a public survivor is that whether or not you know it, you probably are surrounded by survivors. But we talked about this, but like interconnectedness, like we need each other, we need human beings. And so whether it's your chosen family or your biological family or your friends or whatever, like we need people. Sharing with somebody can help us reduce isolation and shame. So I know that like there's this whole like you need to speak out. Like there's an unintended consequence of the Me Too movement is I've heard from so many survivors, they feel so much pressure that like if they don't disclose what they've gone through, that somehow they're less courageous than survivors like me who are very public. And I want to be super clear. I chose to become public about what had happened to me when I was 27 because it was aligned with what I needed for healing. It made me safer and feel safer and better to be public than to not. And somebody who's been through the exact same thing as me might come to the completely different conclusion of what's best for them. And so when I say sharing with somebody, I do not mean that you need to be public the way that I am public. You should only be public the way that I am public if you search in yourself and it tells you that that's what you need for you. What I am saying is that it can be really powerful to have even just one person in our lives who we trust, who can hold our truths with us, to help us reduce isolation and shame, to just share with them, whether it's a friend or a family member, somebody who we feel like we can trust, who can just be that person. My best friend, Kate, was that for me. And for many years, she was the only person who knew. But she knew to tell me that she believed me and that I wasn't crazy and that I wasn't alone. And that sustained me for so many years. So being able to find that person, and it might be the first person you try doesn't do it right. And so maybe we need to try somebody else. But again, feel empowered to tell them how you want them to respond. Feel empowered to say, like, I need you to tell me that you believe me and that I'm not crazy and that you're here for me. And lastly, we're the experts in our healing. And it can be really healing to listen to our inner wisdom, to listen to our bodies and let that be our guide. Whether it's our bodies telling us that like, oh, maybe being around this person doesn't feel good to me, or maybe hearing this song doesn't feel good to me. Or maybe what I need is rest, even when our minds are telling us something else. Just learning to honor what our bodies are trying to communicate to us can be really healing. And those are some of the things that I have found over time to be true. And so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to get to some of the questions. Okay. Give me a second because I'm going to read through some of them and then answer a few. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So I had a question about anger, um, and about how whether or not it can be unhealthy for us to hold on to it. So yeah, anger is something that can sort of, as we talked about, it can run our lives if we don't learn how to tap into it and honor it and find ways to harness it in a way that feels safe and good to us. Again, if you've ever considered punching shit, can't recommend it enough. The reason why I think anger is so important for healing is because I think that for a lot of us, especially I find this really common with childhood sexual abuse survivors, we've been so conditioned to feel sorry for the person who harmed us, to feel um, like they're the victim and we're the person who harmed them, that it can be really we can be left feeling, even as we're pulling, if we might be pulling away from them, we'll feel sorry for them, or we'll feel bad for them, or we'll feel like they're the victim. And so we're racked with guilt. And anger is really tight because anger is something that kicks in when we're realizing something happened that was fucked up, that wasn't our fault. And anger is an active thing. It's an active thing that lives in us. And it's actually, I think anger is a really important step. And I say step like it's linear, but it's not. But experiencing anger, honoring anger can be really essential for us in moving forward from feeling sorry for the person who hurt us into feeling like, oh, great, like that wasn't my fault. And that was fucked up. And so I think that it can be a really valuable tool to help us advocate for ourselves, to help us talk back to the voices of blame and shame that we may feel. And it's really what we do with that anger that's so important. I have a question about recommending for what students will for students who will need assistance, particularly during the holidays. The holidays are hella triggering. I mean, especially during COVID, but like all of the time anyway. A lot of people, like families, are not a safe place for them. And my recommendation always is to create a safety plan and to do it in advance, even if it's a day in advance before you go home. And it's okay if you can't do it in advance and you have to do it on the fly. This is a really good time to practice telling people what you need from them proactively and inviting people to be there for you. And I'm seeing here, UMD Care has a 24/7 hotline, which is great. And so if somebody wants to drop me that number, I'll share it to the group. So make that plan. If there's a particular meal that you're like really worried about, have your friends on call so that you know you can go to the bathroom and text them. Identify places that are safe for you to go to, like maybe a park or a walk that you can escape to when you need. Also, like create distance from yourself and other people if you need, by like saying like, oh, you know, when I come home, I'm gonna actually need to be studying a lot, so that like, even if you're gonna be like, I need 4 hours a day to study, maybe you spend those 4 hours like on TikTok watching shit that soothes your soul, or like binge watching a Netflix show, or like FaceTiming with your bestie. Like set that up now that you're like not going to be available 4 hours a day or whatever, and spend that time doing shit that's soothing to you, that soothes your soul, whatever it is. But create a plan, because I find the hardest part is the anticipatory anxiety, is like, what if this happens, or what if that happens, or what if it feels really bad? And a way to help us is like if we create a plan for all that shit. So if you're really worried about a day or a specific experience, create a plan with your friends or your family members who you can trust of like, if this happens, can you be ready to help me in this way? Can you go for a walk with me? Can you be on the phone with me? Can you do this, that, and the other? And create those safety plans now, because it will also help you feel more comfortable as you're moving forward. Okay. Okay. So somebody's saying that they have a boyfriend and they feel they have to tell them the whole long story of like what happened, and they don't know how to start, and that feeling is so overwhelming, like they don't know where to start, and so it sort of leads them to a place where they like aren't saying anything because saying all of it is too much. I totally understand that. I think that there are a couple of different ways to approach this. First of all is the reminder that like you are in charge of your story. No one is entitled to your story but you. You can share your story with your boyfriend if you decide that that's what's best for you. You can also experiment with telling him a little bit and see how it goes and see how it feels before sharing everything. And a little bit can look like something happened to me that, wasn't my fault, that brings me a lot of feelings of shame and it's really difficult for me. And you can tell them, I don't want you to ask more questions, or you can tell them, I want you to ask questions. And you can experiment and try and just feel how just dipping your toe in feels before the whole shebang. Another idea is to try writing it out for yourself. So if it all feels like too much, maybe try writing it. You can either try writing it and just like vomit everything out without editing yourself so that you get it all out. And then you can be like, okay, this is the part that I want to share with somebody. And maybe you want to share with them what you wrote. That's totally up to you. But also you could try writing out what it is you do want to say to them and what you don't want, and then being able to see it in a controlled way. Okay, this is what I want to say to this person. This is not what I want to share with this person. Because I totally understand it feels so overwhelming that we then don't end up saying anything when maybe we wanted to say something because we wanted the extra support. And so I totally understand that sort of feeling of it being daunting. And so you can dip your toe in, experiment a little bit, but also you can dip your toe into telling yourself your own story. And that's what really writing does, is it helps us tell ourselves our own story. And that's a really good place to start. And try doing that. And when we feel comfortable being like, okay, this is what I want to share and this isn't what I want to share, then we can engage with other people too. Okay. As someone who does not have the same trauma as some of my friends who have shared their experiences with me, sometimes they look for advice. I never know how to respond so that I can be supportive, but also not assume I know how they feel, especially as more time passes. So in terms of like supporting someone else, first of all, you need to honor like what your needs are. So it sounds like you've experienced a trauma, but your trauma is different than other people's. It's really important that you honor what you need, and take care of you. Because if you don't take care of you, then you can't be good for, like you gotta take care of you first. So like if you find that you're in conversations that are really triggering for you, but you feel like guilty, maybe stepping away, it's okay for you to say like, I love you. I want to be there for you. Like, I need to deal with some of my own stuff. And you can even just be like my own mental health stuff or whatever. I love you and I support you. And like, I'm going to check in on you tomorrow. And you can stop that conversation if that conversation is too much for you. You can also like refer them to other people, like it's important to sort of honor that like you can't be everything to everyone. Right. And then in terms of like the support you can offer them, I mean, I think that if you are able to be present and to listen and just validate and affirm, like it is so powerful that what we can do for each other by just saying, I believe you and that you're not crazy and you're not alone. You can go back to those sort of untrue stories that I listed in the beginning. And those are really good talking points of like, okay, well, 75% of people feel like they're crazy. So like, this is probably something that's relevant to this person. And I can say, even if you feel like you're crazy, you're not, it's the way the world makes you feel, but it's not your truth, and I stand beside you and I believe you. And those words in and of itself can be so transformative. It's also okay for you to ask your friends, what do you need? It's okay for you to be like, because that like the support that someone else feels might be different than the support that another person feels. So it's okay to say like, okay, well, what do you need? Would it be helpful for me to check in with you, regularly and ask you like, hey, what's something you're doing for yourself? Or would it be helpful for me to like go for a walk with you? Would it be helpful for me to send you funny gifs that like take your mind off of shit, like to send you a curated TikTok list of like bullshit that's going to make you laugh. There are so many ways to be there for someone. I have a friend who I went to high school with, I went to college with, we live in DC both together, like not together, but in the city. We've been through everything together. She's so like, she'd be the first to tell you like she cannot handle feelings. She's terrible with feelings. I'm all feelings. And I've like needed so many things. When I found out that my chosen father was dying and there was nothing anyone could say that could make it okay, right? Like it was the beginning of that end for me. And she's now a professional chef. At the time she was dicking around a lot in the kitchen. And I lied on the floor of our apartment and she made me a chocolate cake and she served it to me on the ground. I was like face down and I turned over and there was a chocolate cake right there. I had no interest in eating that fucking cake. I couldn't eat anything. I was too upset. But the fact that she was like, this is my love language, I brought you a cake, was like, okay, this person is there for me, even though they have no idea what to say. They can't even sit with me. Like she couldn't even sit to hear my feelings because it was too intense for her. But that was her love language of being like, I still have your back, even though I have my own limitations. And that was 12 years ago. And she's still like my number one, like she found a way to communicate her love and support in a way that still honored what her needs and her limitations were. I'm gonna also text everyone or share the UMD a counseling hotline here. Okay, more questions. Okay. They're asking about like Stockholm syndrome and that they feel like there are survivors in college that invalidate themselves because they stayed with their assaulters and it took them a while to realize what happened to them. Totally. This is another way that survivors internalize like shame and blame because people are like, why did you stay with this person that harmed you? And it's like hella judgmental and it's really difficult for people who haven't been in it to understand like why we continue these relationships. Even when we've been hurt. And I think that it is totally normal and natural to experience harm and to feel confused and overwhelmed and conflicted feelings about it. And I think that people quote unquote staying with people who hurt them is just like another way we sort of judge the way that people survive and endure. And we don't know that like for some people being in a still continuing the relationship with somebody who's harming them might be making them safer than not. And that is a really complicated, sort of nuanced part of survivorship that often gets lost. Whether it's because we rely on that person for housing, for food, for medicine, whether we rely on that person because of our immigration status. There are so many reasons that are valid and important and deal with our safety, why we might continue relationships with people who hurt us. And also then there's this sort of psychological component, which is like the harm that we experienced is physical, but sometimes the way that it most impacts us is like all the psychological shit that went along with it. For me, it was like being told that the person who was most important in my life, a parent, they're harming me and he's telling me like, this is what love is. I mean, that's really fucking confusing. And it's why it took me decades to untangle myself from that, right? Like that's hella confusing. And so I think the most that we can do to sort of support survivors where they are, to love them and be there for them without judgment is really important. Because also like if somebody chooses to leave a situation that is dangerous for them, they're going to need you to be there for them. And they're going to need to know that they can turn to you and you're not going to say, I told you so. Or they're not that you would. They need to know that they don't have to fear that. That like, and also like the most important thing when we're dealing with like an unsafe relationship is to have healthy relationships around us that we can lean on. And so if you see that that's happening with a friend, I know it's really hard not to judge them and be like, oh, you're still with this person that's causing so much harm. But the most helpful thing you can do, the thing that is most aligned with that person's safety, is to continue to love them, to support them without judgment so that they know that they can always turn to you no matter what. So we have the meeting ending in a couple minutes. I'm gonna let anybody who has like a final question hop in while I'm having you all answer any final questions that you might have. I'm gonna chat you all a couple links and I'm gonna put them in the chat so that they're live links for you. And I'm gonna tell you what each of them are. Nope, I just copied and pasted the wrong thing. Okay, did I? Okay, cool. All right. So the first link is my website, healinghonestly.com, which is tight because it's not hyperlinked. So let me do that one more time for you. So still not hyperlinked because I didn't put an HTTP. Well, I feel like you all can copy and paste and figure that out, right? You're college students. You're also smart. So I have a Friday newsletter that it sends out every Friday, except for this Friday. This is the first Friday I'm taking off in 3 years. So let's golf clap for taking breaks. Every week I review a new TV show and I offer content warnings for sexual violence on it. There are puppy pics, there's funny TikToks, there are resources for healing. It's a one-stop shop. So you can go to my website, you can sign up for my Friday emails, you can check out shit there. The second one is an incredible Instagram account. It's the Heal Project, led by my friend Ignacio Rivera. And they offer a really like beautiful, important intersectional approach to healing. They have a talk show with their daughter called Pure Love Talks, where they talk about everything sex. They offer sexuality coaching, and it's all from like a LGBTQI POC lens. It's amazing. The third one is a Instagram account of Mirror Memoirs, which is a project led by my friend Amita Swati. It's a project that centers LGBTQI, Black and Indigenous childhood sexual abuse survivors and their leadership in ending sexual violence. And the fourth is a book recommendation. I know you all are in college. I know you're all reading a ton. It's an anthology. If you want it, you can read some of the essays. You cannot read other essays. You can have it sit on your bookshelf and then be like, one day, maybe I'm going to explore this. Whatever you want. It's called Love with Accountability. It is by a friend of mine, Aisha Shahida Simmons, and who is a childhood sexual abuse survivor. And it includes 40 essays from Black childhood sexual abuse survivors, all about digging up the roots of CSA, not relying on the police state. So how like accountability that is not reliant on the police state. It's incredible. It's a wonderful resource. Makes good gifts too. So so I have those for you. Okay, I have one final question. How do we know if we have fully healed? Well, I guess that is also a difference between people. Some people see healing as like an endpoint, and some people don't. And it's different for different people. For me, I have never visualized my healing as an endpoint. I've always seen it as like, this is something that's just going to be a part of me for my life. And for me, that's helped me like take off the pressure of like feeling disappointed if I experience a trigger, or feeling like I'm quote unquote backsliding if like something gets hard. I see healing as just something that's just a part of me. I think that we know that we're healing when we notice that we're making healthier boundaries for ourselves, when we see that we're advocating for our own needs, when we see that we're honoring what our bodies are telling us, when we are talking back to the voices of shame, when we're able to recognize, hey, the shame and the guilt that I feel are actually not mine to hold. And I see those as practices. And so, you know, I know some people feel like there's a going from not healed to healed. For me, I see it all interconnected. I see it all messy and complicated. because that's how I sort of understand my own life in general too. It's hella messy and that's okay. So those are all of my things. Feel free to reach out to me via social media, via my website, whatever, with any additional questions or anything that you all have. Please take the best care of yourselves. Everybody drink water, eat yummy things, do things that are nourishing and soothing for you today, every day, all of the days. You deserve it.
Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, that was awesome. This is honestly one of the first times I've actually paid attention to an entire presentation on Zoom. I'm not gonna lie. Thank you for that laughter. I thought that joke would hit well. Thank you to everyone who came. So this was recorded, and I'm also going to be sending out the resources that Alisa shared. And again, thank you so much for doing this presentation and for being here with us. If people asked any questions and wanted those answers, I will hopefully be able to disseminate that information somehow via different ways, and I'm going to figure out. So just stay tuned. And yeah, again, thank you everyone. This was grand. And yeah, like Alisa said, take care of yourselves, rest, enjoy the break. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Alisa. This was amazing.
Thank you all. It was great to be with you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.